So, welcome everybody. It's the podcast of the Hungarian Scruton Hub. My name is Kristóf Dallman. I'm the host of this podcast, and I'm very honored by with our guest, Dr. Jan Bentz from Blackfriars Hall, Oxford. Dr. Bentz, you arrived to Hungary now for a conference. Could you please tell me something about what is this exact conference and what will be your presentation?
Of course. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be part of this podcast. So the conference is organized by the Danube Institute, and it focuses on rebuilding society by focusing on the family and what the family means for the future. So in that grand scale, there's obviously multiple topics that need to be talked about. So some of them are political, some of them are economical, some of them relate to policy, some of them relate to demographics. Those are all not my fields. What is my field is philosophy of art and philosophy more broadly speaking. So within this large framework, I'll speak about beauty, and specifically beauty and the polis, so the importance of beauty and art in general for society, and then specifically for the formation of culture.
Okay, thank you. As I mentioned in the introduction, you came from Blackfriars Hall. It was the workplace of the late scholar Roger Scruton. Do Blackfriars Hall have anything from Scruton's ideas now? Is his spirit still in the Blackfriars Hall?
I think his spirit lives on in Oxford in general, not just at Blackfriars, but also in other colleges. There's a couple of scholars, of colleagues, and of friends that still keep his spirit alive, specifically his thinking on conservatism, his thinking on beauty, and more of the cultural aspects of his philosophy. Blackfriars specifically doesn't have any research dedicated to him right now, but I'm sure that we're very open for students picking Scruton up, and also I myself use his texts for my lectures in philosophy of art, specifically his book on beauty, which I find is a very helpful resource for students. It's very accessible, it's short, which is good, that makes it more likely that students actually read it. And his cultural critique, even though it's now a couple of decades old, or some of it is at least a couple of decades old, is still as topical and actual and urgent as it was back then.
Okay, and how did you finish in Blackfriars Hall? You came from Germany,
yes,
and you had lectures in the American Catholic University at Rome. So how did you finish?
That's right. How did I end up in Oxford? That's a good story. So, or rather, it's a big story, a long story, but I'll try to make it short. I studied in Rome. I wanted to study theology originally, but I got stuck with philosophy. Got stuck, in quotation marks, because you needed to do philosophy as a preparation for theology, which is a good thing. But I realized that many of the questions that I had were actually philosophical. And I didn't know that. I thought they were theological, but I figured out that they're actually philosophical. And so I just, after the bachelor's, decided to do a master's degree. And then at the end of the master's degree, I was strongly encouraged by one of my professors to write a doctorate. So that's what I did. And then I taught in Rome for many years for different American study abroad programs. Philosophy of art, among other things, history of medieval philosophy, and like a debating class. And then, a friend of mine studied in Oxford, and he sent me a job offering from Blackfriars, from the Studium, which is where the seminarians are being educated. And so I did not really expect that I had a chance in getting it, but they had a lot of very strange requirements that fit me perfectly. So, for example, being interested in modern philosophy, but being rooted in medieval philosophy, or having taught at a pontifical university and a secular university, which I have all done. So it fit perfectly. So I applied, and well, here I am. So I've been teaching there now for 4.5 years, and hope to continue in the future. Blackfriars has been very good. It's a great environment. Many people always ask me, well, how is it to be Catholic and a conservative in Oxford? And I can always say it's very easy, because my superiors in the hall and in the studio make it very easy for me. My colleagues are very Catholic, so I don't have to worry about that. Now again, like everywhere, there's always a debate on how to tackle modern problems. But overall, Blackfriars is really a little Catholic oasis in the grand, let's say, the grand framework of Oxford University. So.
And of course, the Dominicans have the opportunity to teach in Oxford. So
that's right, exactly. It just comes natural for them. Yes. So, and they have been there since 1221. Now there was a little intermission, after that pesky thing that is called the Reformation. But since 1921, they're back and kicking.
Yes. Okay, back to our main topic, to beauty in modern world. Scruton said that beauty is not just a subjective experience, but it's an objective value. What is your opinion on that, and how can we sense the beauty in our ever-changing and not so beautiful modern times?
Yeah, sometimes not so beautiful. That is true. I fully agree with Scruton that beauty is not subjective. I must say that I usually like to scandalize and challenge the students a little bit when I talk about this, because I say, don't look for objective beauty. And then they look at me with big eyes, and they're kind of scared, because they're like, oh boy, okay, well, he doesn't believe that objective beauty exists. But that's not what I'm trying to say. I think that speaking about objective beauty makes a vital mistake. And it starts with a presumption that is somewhat misguided. It's well intended, and I understand why people do it, but it's somewhat misguided. When you distinguish between objective and subjective beauty, you already start from a modern point of view, which separates between the subject and the object. And the classical point of view, the traditional point of view, was always that subject and object are not actually that separate. They're unified by something greater. And that greater is, well, being, is existence. And so beauty ties, as a transcendental, ties into being. Whatever is, whatever exists, is beautiful. So I think we should move away from looking at beauty and seeking it in the thing or in the thinker, and realize that beauty is something that both of them already have and already share. And so in that way, beauty can, well, reveal what really is, and that's more important, can open the gate and the gateway to the transcendent. So it can become theophanic, it can become an opening to God. So,
okay, then before this talking, we shared some ideas about Scruton, and it was an interesting thing that you said that Scruton has a Kantiastic way of thinking. So in your field, from the medieval philosophical, with the root of your ideas are rooted in the medieval philosophical thinking. What's the difference? About?
What's the difference? That's a good question. So I would say that modern philosophy of art, which oftentimes is just called aesthetics, focuses on personal taste and perception. And that is what Kant effectively wanted to do. In his critique of aesthetic judgment, he wanted to distinguish the judgment of the beautiful, the aesthetic judgment, from all of the other judgments, the moral judgments, the judgment of reason, and the judgment of pleasure, the agreeableness, and so forth. So taste and judgment are one element of the access to beauty, and that's certainly the modern contribution. And Kant, I mean, if you look at the first 30 paragraphs of his critique of judgment, you will see that he has a very intricate way of looking at how I judge something. It's amazing. I mean, the introspection is really, really, just very impressive. For the ancients, what I judge, my taste, is secondary. It's secondary to what the world is, right? And how we experience it. And when we talk about experience, I don't mean the subjective experience, but I'm talking about the connection of me and the world around me, right? You could even talk about like a sort of a participation and the wonder that creates, the wonder for the senses and the application to the senses. And so when I speak about medieval philosophy of art, then that's what I focus on. I focus on what we could call then the objective criteria for being beautiful, but we could just call it the criteria for being beautiful. And these criteria are threefold, right? So you have harmony, you have clarity, right? And you have proportionality. And all of those three elements imply a certain order. And because they imply a certain order, it gives unity to the whole, because the good is ordered, the beautiful is ordered, the logos, in essence, is order, my reason is order, so it all becomes attuned to itself. It's all kind of cross-relational. And that's what's really interesting. Talking about a more kind of modern problem, I think why there is so much ugliness in the modern world is really an effect. It's not a cause, it's an effect of the moral decay. And this is something that's really intricate and interesting when you look at just the psychology of it all, because whenever you're confronted with the fallen nature of the human person, you have to ask yourself, well, how do I convince a person to become better, to get out of their sinfulness? And I think the modern world tends to say there is no getting out. It's just a managing of pain, of suffering, and of disappointment. You will always be disappointed, so you better get used to it, so now find a way to cope with it. Whereas the ancients, and then also the classical writers of the Middle Ages, they would focus on the ideal, and not the ideal in an abstract kind of way, but the ideal in what are we meant to be? And I mean, for medieval theologian, it always meant becoming like Christ. But you could say become virtuous, right? For Aristotle, it would be become virtuous. But virtue is something positive, is something constructive, is something hard to get. So there is suffering, there is discipline, there is sacrifice, but it's not in vain. You will be able to become a virtuous person, and being virtuous will mean that your life effectively will become better, it will become more ordered, and it will become more beautiful. And once you do that in yourself, then you will also be able to recognize beauty in the world. Whereas if you don't, then it's much easier to fall into the belief that the world is only really full of ugliness.
And how can beauty help?
Yeah, that's a good. How can beauty help? Yeah, beauty as a remedy, so to speak. I think we need to really move away from understanding beauty as something subjective. We need to really move away from that. We have to move away from seeing beauty as something decorative, but we have to recognize beauty as form, as revelation, as a revelation of reality, and effectively as, one could say, the midwife of reality, bringing existence or making existence appear to us. So one of the main, I think, one of the main criteria in order to recognize that is unity. Modernity is intrinsically fragmented, and it's fragmented in the sciences, where one science separates from the others and wants to be absolute. It's also fragmented in our personal life, up to the point where we separate our personalities and fragment our personalities, and we don't believe that there's a unifying cause and a unifying or unity to it all. And once we return back to that unity, once we understand that, and I'm going to sound very Platonic here, but that everything is one, then we can also understand where beauty lies and the access to beauty. I'll give you an example. I have a colleague, Maxi Kevenhöhler, and he is a, he's a gifted pianist, but he's also conductor in Madrid and in Spain. And he has a new project where he brings on stage an orchestra or just a couple of musicians, like a chamber orchestra, painters, and poets, and even actors. And he explains the music that he is about to perform. He explains the audience something about it. He performs it, and then the other artists contribute in their own discipline. So, for example, while he played something on the piano, a paintress started painting at the same time. Or you would have poetry recitings before or after, or even during. And that is, and so he did this for the first time, and I think he wants to turn this into a larger project. But what he effectively is doing is he is giving all of the senses of the audience engagement, not just the ears, not just the eyes, but all of the senses. And it's very convincing. People love it. They love it because they learn something about music while listening to music. They connect the dots, and we love connecting the dots. And so he gets lots of positive feedback for that. And so that is what art always aimed at, showing and approaching reality as a whole, engaging with the whole of the person. I'll give you a counterexample. If you go to, let's say, a contemporary art gallery, and you look at a work of art, okay, be it, even performance art, or just kind of a white canvas on the wall, or just an empty room, or an empty room with a globe inside or something like that, and you look at it, okay, some of your senses are engaged, but then in order to understand it, you have to read a relatively long description that is posted on the wall. Okay, that's not art. It's not good art. It's not beautiful art, because it doesn't convince on its own. Look, I'm a philosopher. I'm the first person that likes reading texts. But if I have to read a text in order to understand a work of art, the work of art doesn't speak for itself. It's bad art. I can just read a text. That's fine. I don't need an empty room for that. I need an empty room with a chair, ideally. Otherwise, I get tired. But, so philosophers argue with teaching, argue with arguments and with text, and ideally with person-to-person teaching, like Plato did in the academy. Artists have their own medium, whatever artist they may be. A musician has his instrument. A singer has a voice. A painter has his brush and a canvas. Or some kind of background, and so forth and so on. So every artist needs to express reality with and inform reality with the medium that is at his disposition. And I think if we return back to that, together with this unity and this unifying approach, then I think we can rediscover beauty as well.
Thank you. Before we have to wrap up our session, I have another question. Should or can or could family become one source of this interconnecting beauty?
I think the most important element in which beauty enters and art enters in the family is education. One of my homework that I give to my students and have been giving to my students in Rome as well for many years, is sit down and listen to at least one movement of one of your favorite composer's symphonies. And if you don't have a favorite composer, listen to Beethoven. Sit down for 15 minutes just to do that. And I promise you, most people have never done that in their life. They have never dedicated 15 minutes. And it's really, one movement is actually not that long. Whole symphony, an hour. Okay, that's too long. So you start with one movement and have done that. And if you do that, I promise you, after 5-7 minutes, you will be engaged in the music. And so what can happen in the family is hopefully the parents already having some kind of aesthetic taste, having maybe even a favorite art and maybe even a favorite style within the art. They need to tell their children about it. That's the most important bit. Because when the children encounter this enthusiasm and this love in the parents for the art, it will invoke in themselves curiosity. And then if you give your children some educational means as well, then they will certainly learn how to appreciate art. And this could be many things. This could be architecture, walking on the street, pointing out different types of buildings, pointing out different types of very simple symbolism, okay, very general, it doesn't have to be specific, pointing out statues, pointing out facades of buildings, pointing out beautiful churches. This could be being at home listening to different kinds of music. Even if you yourself like jazz, sit down and listen with your children to classical music. Or if you like pop music, sit down with your children and, listen to jazz or something like that. So that bit will foster that interest in the next generation. And I think once the children are interested in art, and usually art speaks for itself, there is very few people that you have to convince to spend some time with art. Again, everybody's different, and I've talked to people who love music but don't really like painting, or who like architecture but don't really like music. But everybody has something. Everybody has some kind of art that resonates with them. Once that is present, once that is lived, then it will be passed on. And maybe even the parents will be surprised about what the children will start to like or start to discover. And maybe they will learn something then from the next generation. So this goes crossways, right? This goes from parent to children, but then also from child to siblings, but also from the children then back to the parents. So education, I think, is a big deal, and very central. This is, I think, where most of the battle is being fought. And then, obviously, we really have to start being optimistic again about art. I mean, I myself do that. We look at modern or contemporary art and we're very discouraged, and we don't have to be. They're great artists. They're great painters, realistic painters, figurative painters. They're great sculptors. They're great composers. They're great architects, neoclassical architect, they're neo-Baroque architects. They exist, and you can find them. But you have to look for them. And since we're so bombarded with everything, oftentimes we don't take the time to actually look for beautiful art, but we kind of, just let everything happen to us, and then we just see the ugliness. And it's like, well, no. Go out and look for artists, new artists, beautiful artists, and, you may be surprised what you find.
Thank you for your illustrative answers, and thank you for this podcast.
Kristóf, great pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for all our listeners, and stay tuned to Scruton's Hubs podcast. Goodbye.